last week, hopefully you, it's okay if you didn't do the homework. The idea was just to think about your niche, think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your design, or like what you're trying to do in life. Leia, when you get the mural board up, there's like week 1 exercises that you can play with, because you were talking about really finding out where you want to apply. I want to reiterate, like, the reason we start with that is that I find that's one of the most important things, is to know and align with, like, it's kind of your purpose. We talked about it in an ecological metaphor of like finding your niche, like what species are you in this grand ecosystem? And when you really align with that, I find there's a power and potential. And so usually when we start these masterminds, I just want to make sure people know kind of what's fueling them, what's the fire that can push them forward. And especially when you're creating new markets and industries, I think you have to know that. It's vitally important to know what's driving you and what you're here to offer. Today, I want to talk a lot about perceptions, and I'm excited to talk to this group because what I want to present is what really caused this mess that we're in. I want to, like, in my PhD, I studied like what made humans so different from nature. And what I learned is that in the Western teachings, the teachings that I've been given are in conflict with the natural world. And so I want to talk about those things that I've learned, but then I want to talk about indigenous principles. And I want to see this relationship between the two. Because the reason I want to do this is because I think if we understand what caused these problems, like the root of these problems, we can be more effective at challenging them or working with them. So this is very much a white man's kind of teaching. Like, this is what I was taught as an engineer in a Western culture. And it's definitely the source of a lot of our problems. So I'm very curious to see how we can play in this realm. To begin, though, I want to, this this is, I think, a beautiful kind of depiction of two worlds that don't work well together. And this is the point of the conversation, is how do we bridge this? There's a way that's unsustainable, and then there's a way that's been sustainable for thousands of years, and how can we work together in that world? So first, though, I want to hear from each of you kind of like your perception of nature. When you hear that question, I'd love to hear kind of what that means to you. And if you don't mind, I'd love to go around. There's no wrong or right answer. It's just a matter of looking at, like, what does nature mean to you, or what is your perception of nature? Leia, do you mind starting?
Okay. Well, my family in general created my perception from my, I have 11 sisters and brothers. And I have a very large family, an extended family. And we just spent a lot of time outside in various ways. And, when you have a big family and you work as a community, in my family, in a lot of local families, the older person is in charge of the younger ones, and the younger ones listen, but the younger ones are also, has a place in the family as far as following along, cleaning up, following suit and such. And so there was I never questioned that you malama aina. I never questioned that you pick up your rubbish. I never questioned that the mountains and the rocks and the trees also had, everything has a spirit around everything. Growing up was she, him, it, her, not it, she, her, they. It wasn't really a concept, and it without spirit wasn't a concept for me, and I didn't really understand it until I got older and realized other people don't see things as having spirit and personalities. So I guess that's what created it. That there was, I just never questioned it really until I left home. And call me naive or whatever, but yeah. Nature is living, nature is mother, nature is there, nature is listening. And you better take stock in your behavior and how you treat her, or she's not going to treat you very right. So,
Mahalo. I love what you said there too. It's like you don't it's kind of the phrase, the water that you swim in. You don't really know you're swimming. Like you don't really know what your perception is, or that it's different from other people. And that's what this is all about, is exploring kind of, they call that implicit bias, like the things that your brain has been hardwired to believe, and there's no right or wrong. It's just it is exactly what it was. But thank you for sharing. Laura, would you like to go next? You're still muted. Yeah. There you go.
There, lag. There we go. There's a little lag. I believe what created my perception of nature is my culture. It's what is my culture, and how that was perceived. How I perceived nature was through song, dance, hula, hula in particular. We would song, and through hula and song and story of and honoring that, dancing for that, for what it was explained, and from very early on, very little, I felt one with the nature of which I hula for. So for me, that is very clear how I connected with nature, because I knew that all my life growing up, and then as other things got influenced into my brain and learning, I held deep to my younger learning of that, of what nature was to me, and how I perceived it, and take care of it, and malamat it, and go about it. Yeah.
Awesome. Mahalo. Thank you for that. Anything else you wanted to say?
I think that's pretty much sums it up. I could go on more about my perception of nature, but that's how I received nature, or what I believe created my perception.
Cool. Thank you.
Is my song, dance, and I like saying it again because I don't really think of that question very often, but I have over time. Thank you.
Mahalo. Thank you. Hazel May.
Hi, everybody. Mine's going to be so lame comparatively. But it is what I experienced, right? So thank you for the space. So I just wrote down a few notes that immediately came up to me when you're like, what created your perceptions? And it's aligned to a little bit of what you all shared already around your family. My family immigrated from the Philippines, and even though I was born in the US, in Hawaii, like I grew up like with this, like when you're younger, nature is like where you play and like where you get dirty, you can do these things. But what I have learned as I've gotten older is as there was a certain age where my family and like their experiences really dictated through that immigration process, and like what job my dad did, he was in the military, like outside in nature, like transition to at a certain time and point of my age, or like my childhood, to a place of being like wild and dangerous and unknown. And so now when I think about nature, I like, honestly, I carry a lot of fear and a lot of like a little bit of like it's something to be like reckoned with. And that's why I think I honor it so much in that way. And especially as I'm learning about my indigenous roots and like where my family had come from before, and the joy that I had in the time that I can recall of my childhood, where nature wasn't like this thing to be fearful of, but it was something to enjoy and like love and like really honor. And so that's been like what has shaped and influenced like how these feelings have changed over time for me. And then also the media, because I giggled because when I saw this question, I thought about that. And I also thought about like as a child, I watched cartoons and there was like Captain Planet was like a thing that made me feel like, oh yeah, nature isn't scary. Like I can go out, I can save the earth, like whatever, whatever. And like it includes love, it includes all the elements. But then it just became a thing that just became so distant in my life until honestly I came back to Hawaii, where I was like, I'm gonna go outside more and like not be so scared, based off of what I grew up with. So sorry, mine's weird.
No, thank you so much, Hazel. And really, like, I want to acknowledge it's like none of them are weird.
Okay.
This an interesting thing about bias is that it's just what you were given. It's like it's the things that you were given, and whether you like it or not, it's like whether it's from media, from family, from community, from churches, it's just the wiring that happened when you were young. And it's not weird and it's not wrong. I want to make that very clear that there's no right or wrong in this. It's just the way it is. And what we want to do today is explore like being conscious of bias is the first step to adopting new bias.
Mm, thank
So
you.
if there's things that we want to rewire, you can't rewire until you see what needs rewiring. So that's what we're playing with. It's like let's take a snapshot of where we are and where we came from.
Yeah. Maybe that's what I'll say. Like I can acknowledge and recognize that. Thank you, Jamie. But I also know like this is why I'm in the place I'm in now, because I did not like what it converted into or was at a certain point. And I'm just finding like the ability to lean into that more because it was for so long not allowed or not afforded to me. So
Totally.
thank you.
And I just want to reiterate too, this what's so important about why I talk about this, and this is unique to our biomimicry group, is that when you want to go up against a world that seems to be doing things that you don't appreciate, you have to understand that they have biases and that they have subconscious biases as well. And that's the game you play. You want to communicate, you have to acknowledge what their bias is and even explore them, kind of like a sleuth. Because if you can do that, that's when you can start to communicate. And we'll talk more about that. But this is fundamental to systems change. Ivory.
I think I resonate so much with you, Hazel May, and I don't know if it's because we were like raised around the same time, but like I think I have like three really clear like biases. One is definitely like National Geographic because I used to get the little magazines and then watch them in school, and I was like, I'm going to be a photographer for National Geographic. So those were the things that I saw and just thought that was nature. And then um so like a lot of like media and things like that, and that was like all around. I don't know if you guys remember, but like I feel like all through elementary it was like we need to save the planet, and it was really just like very basic, but it was like that was our mission to recycle and reduce and all those things. And then yeah, just everything you were saying was like that was my experience as well. My mom like wasn't raised on this island, so everything was really scary for her. She's also like Italian, so in general, as an Italian mother, she's like everything's scary. So like the nature is scary. Going out on hikes was scary. Like ocean for sure was scary. And so that felt weird to me, and I don't know. So I think I really hardwired reverse as a mother. I'm like opposite, and I'm just like want to raise my kids differently. And so I had like a Hanai grandparents that they really like rooted us and like this is how we do things, this is how we plant things. So I have like kind of all of these three different pieces. It was like one was scary, one was like we need to save everything, which was also kind of scary because that meant like thing was wrong. And then the third one was like, well, we need to take care of it and this is how we do it, and it's like fun, and we like played a lot in my grandparents like garden and things like that. Like that was, and they would take us to the beach, and I'd always be like, I hope my mom doesn't see us like jumping off the pier, like kind of thing. So and that to me felt like I connected to that more. So later on in life when I was like, okay, these are the things I'm going to reject as a parent and these are the things I'm going to take, I really went hard to the third one. So yeah.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you, Ivory. Mason.
Who and what created I think it is my father mostly. So really similar to everyone else, your ohana and experiences. So my father, I would say, had a profound effect on me and my relationship with nature because from a young age, my father's a fisherman and a hunter, and so he like threw me into the water
Hmm.
if I could, as soon as I was born, and I don't think I've ever left. And he would, and it for him it was like his solace, his reprieve, his way to cope with the world. And so he introduced the ocean to me from that lens, from that perspective of it, of like escaping into a place like a alien world that sort of like created like the sanctuary for him. And so it was my relationship with the ocean that really, I think, catapulted me into like how I see it. But I think it's also been my experiences similar to many of you on the call. Um, just because of my upbringing, I was always in nature. And
Hmm.
so it led me into the kind of work that I did, which was, being a firefighter on a rescue team. And I think I would say, I probably lost more close friends than I can count on my hands and my toes, my fingers and my toes to nature,
Wow.
you know. And that's not even including the people that I would find or retrieve or rescue, right? These are like this it so for me it's been this relationship with nature that sort of like to define nature has been at a it's been sort of like a spiritual connection, right? It's like it's life or death for me. um and it's absoluteness, right? It's how powerful. It's the only thing I think that in my life has been able to like to bring me to my knees at
Hmm.
times in my life. um Similar to what you might experience when you know you come you have this relationship or conversation with God, about what life is about.
Hmm.
So it's had a profound you know impact on me.
Cool. Well, thanks for that, Mason. I'll jump in too. Yeah, I grew up on like my father's a farmer, and I think there was an industrial farm, like we're talking like 800 acres. And I think that had a profound impact on like just seeing cattle, like dairy cows being like locked into cages, and then like to be able to milk them, and then like giant fields with like these straight rows. And it was like an element of dominance. That's what I remember as a kid. I was like, this is weird. Like just like holding, like dominating, like weeds were bad. It was just there was something about it. And then on the other hand, my dad always took us to the backcountry to go camping. So we did a lot of backcountry camping, and that's where it's like I saw a wild. It was like a juxtaposition. There was something wild out there, and the wild intrigued me, and like you guys, it intimidated me. And I think media then fed the beast of like nature's scary. I remember, was it Blair Witch Project? You guys remember that movie? That I was like a young teenager, and that one like set me off so much so that I had to like in college I started solo camping just to face that fear because I was so afraid of the outdoors. I was like, there's creatures out here, there's ghosts, and it's like I gotta face them. um so those are the major ones. But then I think I grew up in like a Christian home, like I went to a Christian church. We weren't very religious, but that had like an impact. um and then yes, school. And I want to talk about that because this is the thing that I think uh, is so important. Is like what we're teaching people in school, like the engineers that are coming out. Like I'm shocked at what we're teaching them because it does perpetuate a lot of what I just said of this idea of dominance, of control, of nature as other. And that's the food that we're feeding kids in West in these like American universities, we'll say. um I'm going to skip this question for now and maybe come back to it because I want to really stick with this this idea of bias around nature. And some of you have done this exercise, but I want to engage it again. And this is popcorn style, like anyone can jump in. I want to take notes of like what qualities would you use to describe a good wall? If you think of like a good engineered wall, what makes it a good wall?
Sturdy.
Yeah. Sturdy. Anyone jump in?
The materials, particularly when I look at the rock wall, I think like what kind of rock is it? Like
Yeah.
what's its composition?
Yeah, like strength and composition. Yeah.
Which one's the needle?
What's that, Logan?
Yeah, what's its function? Yeah, what's the niho?
I want to see. Yeah.
Longevity, same as sturdy.
Yeah.
Is it going to last?
Definitely.
Is it going to keep the hurricane out?
Yeah, that's a great one.
Some sort of like separation. Like, is it like a barrier? Is it functioning as a barrier? Yeah, right.
Yeah. Anything else?
Materials and foundation, the what it's how it's built, on what it's on the ground that it's built.
Right. Beauty. Those are great. I think that describes a wall. It's like you talked about separation, about stability, about resisting, those hurricanes, those 100-year storm events. Those are qualities of a good wall, an engineered wall. But what this course kind of invites us to do is think about, well, what's a wall in nature? And think of like qualities of skin, which is kind of like a wall. And skin can breathe, it can shed, it can expand, it can sweat. And I bring that up because the foundation to this work that we're doing is that your thoughts are going to be the foundation of what you create. So your assumptions are feeding what you create. And the wall is fed by these assumptions like, hey, humans are separate from nature. Humans need to control and dictate nature, or that we need to be fighting 100-year storm events. It's very different from what a natural environment might do. Like nature might bend with its environment. It might shed, it might die, it might lose a limb. There are different qualities in nature that make it resilient. And resilience in engineering terms is very different. But the point I'm trying to make is that what you think, your assumptions, inform what you design. And I want to explain what I mean. There's like, yeah, Leah, sorry.
I was just going to say, just when you were talking, sorry to interject,
No,
but
it's good.
Talking about conditioning and being asked that question, my head went to the question directly, but my heart didn't go there. And I think I just realized, as I'm getting older, that I do that. But my heart always said, looking at a place, being a land use planner, for example, I always, in my heart, I think a good wall is something that does the job as much as it can, but that can be replaced. Just thinking about how we try to make things solid that'll last 50 years, houses are supposed to last 50 years, and that drives up cost, and that drives up the need to, get our supplies from the mainland versus looking at permeable things that can be replaced, things that are useful, but don't necessarily have, because nothing lasts forever. Yeah, that there is a different standard for what a good wall is. So anyway, that was real interesting when you started to talk. I'm like, yeah, my heart really wasn't there, but I know what a good wall is supposed to be by what society tells us a wall is supposed to be.
I love that so much. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because that's really powerful to hear. But there's like a training and a wiring that's happened, but there's there's like a history that you can't deny inside your heart that
Right, like bamboo walls are great, even though they're, you know, they might not last. So it's in that same thought process.
yeah. Anyone else want to add? Thank you, Leah. I really appreciate that. So yeah, just to go, you know, to the training that I was given as an engineer, resilience in engineering is about resistance. Like I remember one of the first tests we did is we put a piece of wood under a big, you know, machine, and we tested how much force can it take before it breaks, and can it go back to its original shape. And that's what engineering resilience is all about, is like how much force can something take and go back to its original shape. But if you push, like imagine pushing a tree for 100 years, the tree's going to eventually mold around your fist. It's not going to try and go back to its original shape. And there's a real beauty in recognizing that there's differences between engineering resilience and ecological resilience. But what I love is that, you know, what informs how we design is how we think. So one of the big beliefs in my culture and what I was trained in is that humans are separate from nature. I think it's like, you know, early in the Bible, they talk about that. And you know, the cities I lived in were really great examples of that. There's no natural things. There's landscaped, there's like landscape architecture, there's landscapes, but they're very engineered. There's not much wild, and I love this picture of New York, which is like shows that juxtaposition. So if you think you're separate from nature, you're going to design systems that look and act like they're separate from nature. This is the most perfect example. That's one of the key paradigms. Number two is that nature's predictable and controllable. This, like, you know, to get technical, this came from Newton. If you know Newton, Isaac Newton, he really helped us take nature apart and make it less complex. He helped us kind of like isolate things. So that's where like biology became different from chemistry and physics different from math, because we were able to isolate it and then study it in isolation. So we started to be able to see nature almost like a machine that we could take apart and then reorganize. It became predictable and controllable. And you can see that in how we design. It's like you think about our sewer systems. It's like, hey, we can predict rain events and we can control those rain events and put them in sewer systems, and there you go. And same with farming. Is like, hey, we can inject energy and make these rows and keep weeds out, and we can grow these crops. So one paradigm is that we're separate from nature. Another paradigm or assumption is that we can control nature. And the third one is kind of what I talked about, engineering resilience, is that we can resist nature. Leah, you talked about the, you know, designing for the hurricanes. We've been able to harness energy unlike any other organism. And this is what makes us so special, is that we've been able to harness energy in fire to make new materials and to engineer environments. And that is what has allowed us to resist nature, to control nature, and to separate ourselves from nature. So it's really I think it's really important for us to understand what's influenced the way that we design. It's like these assumptions, like these trainings, and these are from hundreds of years ago for Western cultures. And now it's emerged into these massive cities that we can see are becoming very difficult to maintain. It's very expensive fighting nature. So one of the things I kind of want to reiterate is that those ideas aren't wrong necessarily, but they're definitely outdated. You know, being able to control nature has been really great for creating safe urban environments. Yeah, being able to dictate and engineer nature has been great for producing more food, but it's no longer the case. Like, we're now seeing that they're outdated. And a lot of our problems is that we've been trying to hold on to those assumptions, and keep building with those assumptions when they shouldn't be used. And this is one of my favorite quotes. by somebody I studied, and I got to meet him, Buzz Halling. He said the longer one view is held beyond its time, the sharper and more extreme is the surprise, the perception of complexity, and resulting adjustment. Meaning, if you keep holding on to ideas that are outdated, there's a potential for a great release and collapse. Like that's where disasters happen. And that's like, I think that's true in many ways. Like if you, yeah, like you can see it in social systems too. Like with a politician thinks that we need to do things a certain way, eventually, and he's not, or they're not in tune with their environment. Eventually that shift's going to happen. And whether it's a revolution, whether it's like a new vote, you have to constantly be updating your paradigms and your assumptions. And that's why I love about, you guys all checking in at the beginning on like, what is your basic assumption? Where did your perception of nature come from? So now I'd love to go back to this question. And I want to go around the room again and hear, what is your perception of business? And I'll go backwards this time. So we'll start with Mason, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, this to me is it's transactional, an exchange, and most often goods and services.
Yeah.
As far as back as we can consider, and which requires sort of an understanding of basic business principles of exchange and also relationships. In building that specific, so it's like it's like a specific kind of ecosystem. I feel like that. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you. Ivory, do you want to go next?
I was just gonna say, I think like basically businesses are there to make money. Like just the transactional sense, like whether or not they care about their environment or people, like it's more like the bottom line, just meet that line.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Hazel May.
My immediate word that I wrote down is business is individualized. And so in the sense that, individuals are the ones that are made to succeed, even though it's like structured in organizations, normally the person that, gets all the glory and the fame is a CEO, right? Or
right.
Whatever, right? And so and it drives people, even in a small business perspective, to be very individualized in their approach of the work that everyone else mentioned. So.
Yeah, very interesting. I like what you said about, the CEO. It's like, it sounds hierarchical as well. Like everyone's doing something but that person at the top is the one that's gaining the most.
Mm-hmm.
Leora.
So I hear everything you guys are saying, and yes, that's a part of perceptions I have of business as well. But what I was taught about business, how I feel about it, is think, like relate to business, is that it's basically, it's like an act of how an act to get money, to get or give money, goods, like products and services. So, and it can be done uh various ways. So to me, I was taught business is not just in a certain, like a certain funnel, or there's not only one strategy of business. So there's like the independent business, there's the corporations, there's the entrepreneur who does business, there's the family member that has to handle some business with family. So, and it's usually like an exchange of something like in relational to money or services. So I've taught, and to elaborate on that, is that business is also incorporates my values. So and probably some, and like the best values of it. So values incorporating it from like personal values into how to bring it into business and operate from that in that way. That's what business is to me. Like I don't know, like I really mix it with values, and that's how, and some of the business people that I've worked with, they taught me that. So
Right.
that's how I feel. And we operated in that way when things, in order to figure out things, and then, and like I say, in the working sense. And then I've used that in my personal life too. And then I can kind of see it come up. So it's kind of like an operational thing. Yeah. Like I was taught about it, and I work through it with a lot of work that I do. And it's not always money, but it is also like services, and sometimes it's just trade. Yeah, we're just trading some things, old school bartering way kind of thing. So I think that was all business, but it's just, then it became a different word and we call it business, but then it's like, I like the old school way of trading and bartering too.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Leah, I'm curious about you.
So I have evolved my perspective as I've, gotten older, but what really immediately struck me in trying to go at the feelings inside versus how I would, how I would normally respond as a professional now, is, to tell you the truth, what I was taught about business was that it's about numbers and it's not for girls.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
Interesting.
my mother was a business person, and she was the only female manager she was a buyer merchandiser for Vic Save Mason. She was the only one. And so I saw her acting very differently in her work and her business person as she was as a person. And so for me, it was acting a certain way to sell something, acting a certain way to be able to, not in a malicious way, but to manipulate the situation in order for it to go in a way that you predetermined. And I was on the fence about how that made me feel inside. As I became older, it was about business being the rest of my life, about it being very boring, about it not being authentically me. And then when I became a planner, there's been, requirements to take certain classes regarding business ethics, which I have an issue with, because to me, ethics is ethics, business or anything else. And I inside would resist and be not happy because I saw people being very aggressive about themselves. And this was something that is encouraged. And so, even now, trying to evolve what I understand now about business to kind of know that it doesn't have to be these things, but being very aware that that is, the feelings that a lot of people have toward, I have toward it, and wanting to, really wanting to look at it as responsible, as inclusive, as based on more than getting what I need, like as an individual, but as a community. And the funny thing is where I love business was really on social marketing and social business. So I guess that's the evolution of it. But anyway, long story short, what I was taught about business was that it's too complicated. There's too many numbers, and girls don't usually excel in it. That's where it started.
Thank you so much for your honesty. I really do appreciate it. Yeah, it really helps the conversation, and hopefully helps yourself just to like acknowledge that these are the assumptions. For me, I'll share too that I was never taught anything about business. Like there's nobody that actually sat me down. It was more of like through osmosis. And I remember, I had a paper route when I was like 7, and that's when I first started getting transactions and getting money. And the feeling I had was like to hold, it was sacred. There was something about it. It was like I was hoarding it, keeping it from my brother who was trying to steal it. So there's like a real like scarcity mindset immediately set in, that there was like not enough or it was going to go away, and that it was like important. And that was like a 7-year-old. The other thing too is like, yeah, what I was raised with is like this belief that business is about killer instincts. Like I heard shark, like you got to be a shark, you got to be like vicious, which I mean, my personality is not really like that. So I always felt like I wasn't a businessman then, because I was like, I didn't want to kill people and take their money. And I love what you said, Leah, like you had to be something, like you had to be like, that made me feel like, okay, I had to be a character to be a business person. So yeah, that was my experience with business. Any other last comments about what you're taught about business? Okay. I think when your mural boards are up, I would really love for you to go into week 2 and just map out your perceptions of nature and your perceptions of business. I think it's really important for you to look at it and just see like really, and the more you can dig into it, the more you can start to analyze why you are the way that you are. Because like I said, how you think informs how you create things. It's how you show up. It's how you design. So if you're going to create a world-changing business, you have to be really conscious of what assumptions are going to go into that business. And if you're not conscious of them, then these old default ones are going to drive it. Does that make sense? So knowing,
Can you say that?
sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to write
Well, yeah, I want to make sure that everyone, if you map out what your biases are and really dig in, because there's conscious bias, but there's also subconscious, and they're called implicit bias that you don't even know are happening. And that is like the computer processor that's running how you show up. It's informing what you create. It's informing how you behave. Those biases are the foundation to everything that you do. And if you're not aware of them, you're going to keep making the same thing. It's like we're going to keep making the same cities until we start to challenge the assumptions that are feeding them. And you're going to keep making the same thing. So if you want to make something different, if you want to make a successful business that's regenerative or that's like challenging status quo, you need to inject it with the proper principles and beliefs that you want to lead it. So knowing your bias is the foundation to creating something, creating anything, and creating something special. Yeah, and it's an ongoing exploration. Like you're constantly learning about your bias, and that's what the community is so helpful. And hopefully in this group, I encourage us to, I really encourage us to be as honest as we can and honest with each other, because we're here to help each other. And there's going to be implicit biases that I have that you can see that I can't see. Like you see how I'm showing up. And for you to reflect that and say, hey, Jamie, you're being a bit of a dick, or like whatever, it's like whatever it is that you can see that I can't, helps me understand what biases are driving the program. So it's really important. Like the mind is such a powerful tool, and it's good to just know what's going on in there.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Ivory.
Just looking at the exploring our different assumptions, like there's all these different types, and maybe you're gonna go through that. Some of them are kind of like scares me a little bit. Are we looking at like all of them and then being like, okay, like all of these ones or this one, and like we can choose more than one?
This is, yeah, I share all these different, because when I put this textbook together, I didn't even know these all existed.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so what this mural board, just go through and read them, and you can start to get aware of like, wow, biases. There's so many different biases, and there's like, maybe I relate more to one than the other. For those that don't have the mural boards, we'll look at this one, like anchoring bias. This is like, anchoring bias is an example when somebody tells you something and they say that's the truth. It's like in your brain instantly goes, oh, okay, that's locked in. That's what the world is. It's like whether it's from a religion or your parents or your teacher says that's how things are done. That's an anchoring bias. And then what you might do is, in the example I give is confirmation bias. This is beautiful. Confirmation bias is then once you have that anchor, it's like, hey, that's the truth. You will now start to only see evidence to support that anchor. And this is the crazy thing about our brain, is it actually eliminates information. It is hardwired and designed to eliminate information to simplify your world. So you, all six of us, are seeing the world in totally different ways because we have different anchoring bias and we have different confirmation bias, and we've been perpetuating those. That it's like psychologists say, it erases vast swaths of information.
It's like
To me, yeah, go ahead.
Or no, just reminds me like the Instagram or TikTok algorithm that they're like, all right, you like this, so then that you only see that specific thing. And I don't know, just reading some of these, I'm like, oh shit, there's like things that I don't even know that I'm biased about. Which obviously this is the point of this, but then are we gonna come to existential whatever crisis? Yeah. Of like, oh my gosh, what is even true anymore?
Yes. Yeah, I will warn you that this can happen.
Yeah, I like your open invitation to it. I feel like it I think the prep work is really important to have those kinds of conversations, especially and specifically to certain content. Or maybe not. Maybe it's like jump into the fire. Here it is.
Yeah. We're a group that believes in systems change, and systems change is uncomfortable, and systems change starts when we start to think differently. So it is like, yeah, we kind of have to jump into the fire, but we want to do so with some, I think you're a great point, Mason, like maybe some grace. Like, we don't have to say everything that we believed is wrong, or it might feel a little bit uncomfortable. The other thing I'll mention too is like, there's a very physiological reason this happens. So in my research, I was like, okay, what made humans so different? And then I found out about assumptions. I was like, oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. And I was like, why do we make assumptions? And then I found out it's because, one, we don't like the unknown. We're scared of the unknown. Like, that's like, if you think of death, there's so many assumptions of what happens after death because that's a great unknown. It's like, we don't know, but we have religions to believe in. We have like stories. We have things that can help us. So because we don't like the unknown, and because our brain actually can't handle all of the complexity, it helps us simplify our environments. And that's what assumptions does. It's like, oh, okay, can narrow the scope a bit. It's like, it's not so crazy. Our brain is also the most intense organism or part of our body. It uses a ton of energy. So if we were living in a world where like there was no simplification, when everything was wildly complex, like our brain would eat all of the nutrients out of our body and we would die. So the brain actually has to simplify to keep our body alive. And so that's why it'll make these neurological pathways, these synapses. It's like, hey, as a little kid, you see something, you make an assumption, like that's how it is. And then confirmation bias is going to keep feeding that pathway. So it gets stronger. And the older you get, the more rigid your brain gets. It's like your beliefs get kind of locked in. And that's why the work that we're doing, as Mason says, like, is scary, is because we're unlocking those things that kept us safe for so long, that helped simplify our worlds. And that's intimidating. It's uncomfortable. And it's okay to feel that. Like there's nothing wrong. And your body will, like, if it's too scary, your body will shut down and you'll just go back to your to your assumptions where you're safe. But I think when I do this work with people who are not indigenous to their place, I encourage them to keep pushing through, because some of the paradigms we've been taught have been outdated. Like anyone who's done an engineering course like me has been trained to believe in outdated ideas. And we can't keep just doing that. Like if I want my grandkids to have a life that, I want them to live, it's like I've got to change my mind. And so you got to do that. The dirty work starts all in your brain. Yeah, Leah.
I have a question. So I'm perfectly aware that I have many assumptions and biases. And maybe this will come later on in more conversations, but I'm really interested. I'm between synapses, if you will, where I recognize a lot of it, but still making the synapses are not like necessarily hooked together yet.
Right.
For example, this is a real easy one. I would never put a cold pot on the stove, and I had to go Google it before I believed that it was okay. And I still have a hard time. I also don't like turning left. I don't like turning left. And I had very sharp biases and fears and everything, particularly about left off of a highway. And even though I know and I practice, I'm still having a hard time. But I mean, that's really shallow examples. I have deeper ones than that. So I'm hoping that one of the things that in going over this and maybe sharing how people are kind of practicing those things that are uncomfortable for them, even trying to explore how things that are not making sense as far as our role in this world and the type of role that we want to create. For me, one of my biases is that I'm stuck in the industry that I'm in.
Right.
Even though in here I know that's not true, but not necessarily seeing the connections. So I'm hoping that that's some of the things that we are going to explore, because it goes from I want to do everything nothing, blurry.
Yeah.
I don't know how to get there, even though I know where it is and I know where I am. So anyway, I just wanted to that would be one of my
I
my
appreciate
hopes.
that, Leah, because I think that's kind of what I was alluding to is the exploration of the biases. They're definitely, in my mind, at least, there are, I don't know if you call them principles, but definitely there's a process to it, right? I mean, that we're on when we're like exploring, like, and typically, like for instance, one of the principles is like I tend to go too far in one direction. Once I adopt a bias, and I can put this like right on the table because I was thinking about it just as you were speaking, right? Is like I have come to the realization in my last 3 years of trying to build INA-based organizations that I need to be very conscious of my original bias of inclusion and equity and being distributive from a relationship standpoint, to recognizing that there's this other piece that I need to take into consideration in how I form this specific kind of initiative that are for an indigenous group who has been marginalized. And so it's like this, it's kind of like the political system, right? It goes like from one pendulum to another pendulum, a swing here in terms of how I feel. I've come to a point where I'm like, I don't think I can have a non-Kanaka lead this organization. I need to find Kanaka and empower them and put them into these kinds of situations, from going back to recognizing like, man, that's just it. That's so difficult to some degrees. And I feel like it goes against some of my principles. My point is that it's this sort of internal battle about where it is we are on along these continuums that I think are really important for us to recognize, and how we navigate to those outcomes. And they might be different at any point in our lives based on our experiences and what what we're trying to accomplish right at the moment.
That's so helpful, Mason. Like as you're speaking, I just pictured like a raft on shaky waters. It's like you don't really have good footing, and you're just kind of like figuring it out. Like what is the yeah, where are we going?
My bias 10 years ago was, I have to find a white woman to take care of some aspects of my nonprofit organization
Right.
that I haven't been able to fill with others, you
Yeah.
know? And I'm like completely like, my gosh, you're such a colonizer too. That's the way the way you're thinking, we're like subjected to sort of the ideals of how it is, like this hierarchy at every moment of our lives. And I'm very conscious of it, and yet I haven't figured it out. You know what I mean? Like I
Yeah.
still haven't figured it out. Like,
Yeah,
this
this
is an
is
answer.
really, really good. I'm gonna, Leah and Mason, we won't touch too much on this, but this is a tool that I want to introduce right now. It's in week 7 and 8. It's context, purpose, results, CPR, but it's a tool that I've learned in the past couple of years that has helped me play with different biases. And what it does is, you start by writing out like, what results are you trying to achieve? Like let's just pick something specific that you want to like work on. It's like, hey, how do I get my business to reach whatever 10,000 in sales? Then you ask like, why are you doing this? And the purpose is like the driver, and the purpose really helps you figure out why you're doing it. And it makes decisions easy, because it's like, if you know your purpose really well, then you can, like, if somebody comes into your life and they don't help or support that purpose, you'd be like, I don't have time for it. It helps streamline things. But the thing I want to talk about is this context, because this is one of the most powerful tools. We'll touch on this as we go out. One of the most powerful tools, because context means like how you're showing up. It goes to that idea of bias, but if you're not conscious of your bias, then your context is like it's like a default. It's like you're showing up how you usually show up, but you have a chance to put on different contexts. And to give you an example, is like the context I have in sports is going to be different than the context I have with when I put my kids to bed. Like when I'm in an athletic environment, I'm like, my context is like, I want to win. Like there's a dominance, there's like a competitiveness. When I'm holding like a new baby and putting him to bed, it's like my context is gentle, it's soft. And so you can put what's amazing about this is that as soon as you're aware of your context, you can start to try different ones on in different situations. And I've used this in business a lot, where to give you a practical example, I was asked to be on a panel with like these people that I thought were way above me in importance. And so my context was originally like nervousness. I was like, why? And like self-deprecation, like, why am I here? And if I would have held that context, I probably would have shown up as like, why is that guy here? And people would have read that. But instead, I chose the context of, this is hilarious. And so I went up there thinking this is hilarious. And I had the best time. Like I was just like, shooting the shit. I was like just having fun. And this was one of the first times I practiced context. And when I got off the stage, a CEO of like a big business of like 600 employees asked me if I wanted a job. He's like, I just loved how you showed up there. And I was like, okay, this context actually worked. Like I get to choose how I want it to show up instead of taking the default. And that helped me achieve a result I wasn't really looking for. But we'll talk more about this, but I want to point this because this is something you can start playing right away. And you can just look at this board. It gives you all the information. But context has become one of my most powerful kind of tools to play with for dealing with bias changes. And how do I deal with the uncertainty of bias? So that's week 7 and 8. Any questions on that though before we kind of move? Okay. So Leah, well, all of us started to get to that. One of the earlier we asked what makes a good wall. And now I want to talk about like principles that are more INA based, and explore like, and I'm going to use the fish pond as an example. I was hoping Mahina and Paleki would be here as well, but I'm curious, like what describes the quality of a good fish pond? I'm not sure if you guys are all super familiar with fish ponds, but we could think of any regenerative or INA based, design. Or we could just think of INA in general. Like how does INA design? And we'll go again, just like throw out ideas, like what would make a good design in nature?
Working with what's there
Yeah,
already, kind of being aware of the flow
yeah,
of
yes,
nature in that area to start off with, and letting that kind of direct the design.
yes,
Along those lines, it's really around this true form of integration,
yeah,
complexity of interconnectedness, that finds balance. So where it is compensating, it seeks to find that neutrality, to provide life.
oh, I love it. Yeah,
I think also like the idea of like thinking towards the future. So like always like replenishing and like the making sure that there's room for the next generation of fish that they're, so it's not just like stagnant and like right now, but future planning.
yes, I love it. Yeah,
And it's safe, protected.
yeah. Anything else?
Having
The
someone who knows.
the people that are involved, because I don't know too much about it either, but I think the people that have the knowledge and are able to pass that on, to integrate all what you others said.
Yeah,
The people that are in charge, or putting, yeah, the people that are malamain are taking care of it, and how it's perpetuated, so it for future.
yeah. I like that. I wrote down memory. It's like
Mm.
having a memory.
Mm.
Which is very biological. Like our genes, our DNA is all memory.
Very true.
And it's kind of like a microcosm, right? So the fish pond serves as something that is connected to on a much larger scale,
Yes. Yeah.
to a larger system that
Yeah.
and so what happens there affects that system and vice versa, right? And that's how it becomes this ladder for productivity and abundance.
Yeah. Anything else?
There's, and I'm not as familiar, but there's something that I've noticed, like each contributor like does what they're supposed to do, if that makes sense, or what
Yeah.
they can. Okay.
Yeah.
So each one plays a role, I think. And they play
Yes.
that role based off of what either they're naturally good at or can do well.
Yeah.
I think with Hazelmane's comment and Liara's too, I think about, like, I think sometimes we, talking about biases, right? We always say, oh, I know first, from a lens of I know first. But I think that there's this recognition um, within the fish pond system and our culture that I always ask about. Like, I always inquire, like, what would Aina be without Kanaka, and what is Kanaka's role in that, right? So along with the DNA, it's also around like we have, when we talk about Malama, we have this role in here that's really important in order to kind of keep and not only maximize but keep these systems like operable, right? Like maintained and in good form. Um, and so while we may not be at the top of the food chain, so to speak, regarding the importance of it, we are part of that system.
Yeah.
I think
it's so cool. Like one of the things I hear is like nature, there's no unemployment in nature. Nobody's like sitting around getting handouts. It's like everyone's got a role. I love that question, Mason, of like, as Kanaka, like what is the role? Like, how are we going to be contributing? And you can't be lazy. That's when you get eaten. It's like if you're just sitting around for too long, it's when the tiger gets you. Really, yeah. And so in that, it's like we're a species, and you said this, Mason, we're a species within an integrated system. Like we're contributors. These are beautiful. I wrote them down and I'll share them. But I ask you this because the point of bioinquiry is to really study how nature creates things and understand nature's principles. And when you understand those, you might inject them as new biases into whatever it is you're going to create next. So when we know nature's principles, I would say, like, when we know indigenous principles of how to like be a contribution to place, those can then inform how we design. That's why I find this work so powerful, because I've been trained in a certain way, and now I'm learning new skills from nature and from indigenous teachings on how to be a contribution to my place. How do I create designs that contribute rather than take and separate and control and dictate? So these principles are very powerful, and yeah, I want you to I want you to think about what principles there are in nature. And I will say too, next week we'll dive a little bit further into them, and we have some that have been pulled together by biomimicry experts. But I would love to know you, like, how do you see nature? And you could think of that fish pond, and you could share some of the things that you talked about. What are the principles what's the biases or the principles that we can learn from nature? Take a pause and just see, like, take a temperature, how people are feeling. If there's any questions or things that are kind of locked in their brains right now.
I get one question, Jamie. You can walk us through, like, so I'm not a mural guy, just like it sounds like a lot of people on the call.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be, I'm also the kind of person who's like, oh, this is the lesson I gotta do. This is my homework, is what I gotta do like for this week. And I failed. But it sounds like I'm not the only one failed. But so can you walk us through the mural as well? Like, I just want,
Sure.
like, I was able to get to like those 7 questions you got to ask yourself or whatever. And I thought they were great questions, by the way. And Oh, this is not mine, is it? No, no.
No,
Okay,
this is Ivory.
oh, Ivy. Okay, yeah, I've. So yeah, I mean,
Here, I'll
so
do mine.
we just follow. Just can you just maybe a lay of the land on how it is we're approaching this in weeks, because it looks enormous when I see it, and then I'm like I'm like, is this where I'm supposed to be?
Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. So yeah, just to, I guess I'm gonna wrap up the course because and then we'll move into that, because the one thing I was gonna do, Mason and Ivory and Hazel may know this, but there's like a something on, we're gonna use the adaptive cycle to start to explore like a future that we wanted to create. We're gonna hold off on that till next week, and I'll send a video that gives you a primer on what the adaptive cycle is. But it's a way of looking to nature as a guide for how do we adopt new thinking? How do we create a new system? So we'll pause that because I feel like we've got enough to chew on for today. But I just want to just let you know. Okay, so mural board 101. This is my Kauai Commons mural board, stuff that we've been working on together for 2 years. But you don't need to worry about that. This is the Kauai Commons course. So when you get to it, I've set up a template. Like all of this is movable. Everything is like dynamic. And this section is to describe the course, how we've set it up throughout the 7 weeks. And then the eighth week is us in person. But you can see like each week has a theme. Last week we talked about knowing your niche. Today we're going to talk about shifting rooted systems, which is like our biases. There's like engagement. This is for me to be like, hey, this is what I'm going to walk through. This is like the agenda. And these are the desired outcomes. So this, like, you can go through here and see what's coming up. You can see that I did a CPR. So you can see what's driving me to do this. This is my belief. Like, I think this needs to happen. Indigenous businesses need to thrive for this planet, for my kids. And this is the purpose for why I'm doing it. But Mason, yeah, for you, it's kind of like reading a book. Start left from right, or go from left to right. That's how I've set it up. You can, if you have a project you're working on, you can just put some things, and I'll show you what I mean. You can, on the left here, I think it's on the left for everyone, but there's like a tab of a bunch of different things. The pencil is, you can actually literally draw if you want. Sketches. There's sticky notes, and you can pop them in. And then there's text, where you can actually write long form text. So it's really dynamic, pretty fun tool. How we set this part up is, these are all sticky notes, and they're templates. So you can just click on them and add, like, what drives you is like, whatever. My kids. You don't have to do every one of these questions, but it's like fun to think about. Like this question I enjoy, like what when you're like, when nobody's looking, what are you reading? Like what websites are you on? Because I think that tells a lot about like your desires. Like you're not performing for anyone. It's just like, what are you into? It's like, yeah, I love YouTube shorts or whatever it is. And so we try and give you a pathway to go through this. And you can answer each question, or you can skip a question. Like you don't want to answer that one, go to this one, and just follow the arrows, and it'll take you on this path of really, this first one's about discovering your niche, and what lights you up and what would be of value. And then you can come down here and go again. Just follow the arrows. At the bottom, I've given you a space to, if there's any thoughts or ideas. It's like you thought of a book, or maybe something came up in the course. You're like, oh, I want to read a book. This is kind of a space for you to do that. And then, of course, you have room everywhere else. It's like, if you want to, like, I don't know, just like put images whatever you want. You can go and take screenshots and go back to your mural board and just make like a collage of things. Like it's your personal whiteboard. You could put website links. It'll put your Google, your website. And so it's set up like each week has this board that you can go through. So last week you could go through here if you want. If you didn't, it's okay. You can also go back. In week 2, when we talk about biases, here's this first line is all about your biases. And you can kind of play with these and learn new. There's like the hyperlink is a quiz for implicit bias, which is interesting. It's a quiz done by Harvard. So you just click on it and it'll take you there. And yeah, each week, kind of we've set up the template to start from top, go from left to right. And it like takes a little bit of getting used to learn the tabs and stuff, but I think, yeah, once you get the hang of it, it becomes pretty straightforward. Is that helpful, Mason? Is that kind of?
Yeah, it really is. Actually, thank you for taking the time. And just so I'm clear, because there's a lot of content right in each week.
Yes.
Like to my sort of admission, I only got to like some of it this week, but and yet I'm under this assumption again here that we're working on specific outcome in order to get to the second week. So I just want to make sure that if there was anything within week 1 that we want to make sure we accomplish, that because it's adding up until the completion of the course here, that we want to make sure we're check marking something off.
Yes.
If we are,
Yeah, it's a great.
See, there's the colonizer mind again, man. It's like.
Well, I think on my part, I can do a better job on isolating specific homework. Be like, hey, like I'll take a snapshot. Let's say, for example, like your homework this week is this, like hit these 3 things. And if you want to explore more, go for it. But I would love for us to have like a handle on like what are some of our biases and then maybe like what is our belief of nature. And then everything else is like, you can do it if you want to, but it's not necessary for this course. I think it's a great learning for me to help you guys work through. There's a ton of material. So instead of overwhelming you, we'll just isolate specific things each week.
That's all good, but thank you for that.
Okay. So I can do that. Part of the tricky part of this course is like, because there is so much information and it's designed to be dynamic, like we're going on our unique path, like we're kind of following the flow of the conversation. It makes it hard. Like I think I'll do a better job of just like isolating, like, okay, hit this little section. That's important. The rest is peripheral. And then we'll go to the next section based on our conversation. I'll kind of help guide us through this ocean of potential knowledge. Cool. That's helpful. Thank you. Maybe while we're here too, I just want to make sure we get everyone's mural board up before I leave. So Leora, were you able to get yours going? Oh yeah, Hazel May. I do have a couple.
Leora, or I have not.
Okay.
That's me.
That's you, Leah? Okay.
Yes.
Well, it keeps taking me to this though, which is strange. Have you made a new board?
I delete. Well, I have nothing on my board. I accidentally created one to begin with, and then I thought it was you, but it was really me.
So. Yeah. So watch when I go to Hazel May's, I can see hers is probably gonna work.
Okay.
So I think she's made a board. I think she called it Kauai Common. If I go to board, I'll open in my Miro. It'll take me to what I was just showing, like something similar. So somehow, yeah, so she has a blank board. Oh no. I don't know why it's not letting me. Oh, there we go.
Hmm.
Yeah, so here's Hazel Mays. It's like it takes me right to her board. And then what I can do is just share the information. And if you wouldn't mind, maybe just for helping me out, if you could name it your name.
Okay.
And that's for everyone, just so, because like you can see I have a bunch of tabs, and if I have a bunch of Kauai commons, I won't know whose board is who.
So rename it, yeah.
Where do we name it? So I create a board and then name it? Is that
Name
what I
it.
need to do?
By our name, right?
Yeah.
You want our name in there.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
exactly. So you can see Ivory's. I'm gonna rename Ivory's just so it's Ivory, just so I can quickly see it up, and because I'm gonna have a bunch of different Miro boards.
Did mine change?
I think this is easy. There's Hazel May.
I'll
And
leave out the diacriticals.
so now I've just uploaded to Hazel May.
And then I share it.
Yep.
Okay.
All right, Hazel May's in.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Um,
Ivory. Oh, there you go. This looks like the one. Yeah, we got you. Awesome.
Yay.
Okay. I will.
It's me. That's me. Okay, awesome. Ah,
Okay.
thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Lara, did we are you having troubles? Or are you able to
so
get the
it
mirror
looked
board
like
going?
I created my own board. And I thought, okay, that was me. Leah. So I was able to get in last week, but I saw I must have I have to add you.
Yeah.
Okay. And where exactly do I add you so that I can get into Let's see.
Are you, maybe, do you want to share your screen? Actually, I'm going to
Find
stop
me.
recording too. I don't think.
Maybe I just